Let me ask you something very specific. Last night you were careful. You skipped the dessert. You passed on the bread. You maybe even went to bed a little earlier because you wanted to give your body the best shot at a good morning. You did the things you have been told to do. You followed the rules. And then you woke up, grabbed that glucose meter, and the number on the screen stopped you cold. Higher than it should be. Again. Maybe even higher than after a meal the day before. And that sinking feeling hits immediately. That moment where your brain starts running through the checklist. Did I eat something wrong last night? Was it the small piece of fruit? Was it the portion size? Did I miss something? What did I do? And then the discouragement sets in because this has happened before. It keeps happening. And no matter how carefully you try to manage things, the morning numbers seem to operate on their own logic entirely, completely disconnected from how hard you worked the day before. But here is what I need you to hear right now before anything else. You may not have done anything wrong because there is a process happening inside your body between roughly 2 in the morning and 6 in the morning that has absolutely nothing to do with what you ate for dinner. Most people with type 2 diabetes or prediabetes have never had this explained to them properly. And because no one explained it, they spend years, sometimes decades, blaming themselves every single morning for something their body is doing completely on its own, driven by mechanisms that have nothing to do with willpower or discipline or whether you had the right dinner. This video is going to change the way you understand your morning glucose numbers. And I say that not as a sales pitch, but as someone who has watched that shift happen in real patients, in real clinical situations, over and over again throughout my career. I am Dr. Megan Foster. I have spent decades working with patients dealing with metabolic disease, insulin resistance, fatty liver, and the very real, very exhausting frustration of feeling like your body is working against you no matter what you do. And I can tell you with complete confidence that one of the most common and most damaging misunderstandings in blood sugar management is the belief that a high morning reading always means you failed the night before. Sometimes, yes, what you ate the evening before plays a role. We will absolutely talk about that in detail today. But very often, the real driver is something much deeper, something most people are never told about. Something that operates below the level of what you eat and drink in the metabolic architecture of the body itself. And until you understand it, you will keep chasing the wrong problem. You will keep restricting the wrong foods, blaming the wrong moments, and missing the actual opportunity to change things. So here is what we are going to cover today. I am going to walk you through exactly what is happening inside your body during those quiet overnight hours, the biological process that can raise your blood sugar while you sleep, regardless of what you ate. I am going to explain the silent role your liver plays in your morning glucose and why most people never hear about this connection until significant damage has already been done. I am going to walk through the specific factors that make this problem worse, things that are completely modifiable and within your control. And then I am going to give you practical, clear, simple steps that you can start this week. Not some overwhelming overhaul of everything at once, but real starting points that can begin shifting your numbers in a meaningful direction, often faster than people expect. This is going to take some time because I want to do this properly. I want you to leave here actually understanding what is happening, not just with a list of things to avoid. So stay with me because by the end, the number on that glucose meter is going to mean something completely different to you than it does right now. Let us start where it actually begins. Think back a few years, maybe 5 years ago, maybe 10. There was probably a time when you could eat a reasonably normal dinner, go to sleep, and wake up feeling relatively fine, maybe even good, a little lighter, clearer, ready to move into the day without that heavy, foggy, slightly off balance feeling that may have become your normal morning now. At some point, that changed. Maybe it happened gradually, so gradually you almost did not notice. until you looked back and realized how different things felt. Maybe you started waking up feeling heavy even before you got out of bed, thirsty before you even reached the kitchen, a little foggy and slow, like your brain needed extra time to come online. Maybe some mornings you felt slightly inflamed, like a low grade puffiness in your face or hands. And the glucose numbers started telling a confusing story. Higher in the morning than they were after dinner, higher after a careful night than they sometimes were after a less careful one. Unpredictable in a way that made you feel like there was no reliable connection between your behavior and your results. Maybe your body shape changed in a specific way during this time. Your waistline grew, your belly became more prominent, more firm, harder to lose no matter what you tried. But your arms and legs stayed relatively thin, maybe even got a little thinner over time. And that specific pattern, the growing middle with the thinner limbs, is actually clinically significant. It is telling us something important about what is happening internally. We will come back to that. And through all of this, many of you genuinely tried. You switched to diabetic labeled foods. You gave up desserts. You reduced portions. You cut out bread and pasta and white rice. You did the things you were told to do. And every morning still felt like starting over, like the effort of the day before meant nothing to the body that woke you up at 6 a.m. with a number you did not want to see. I want you to know that this pattern is not unique to you. It is not a sign that you are doing something uniquely wrong or that your situation is especially hopeless. It is an extremely common pattern, and it has a very specific biological explanation that most people simply never receive. Ever. Here is what is actually happening. Your brain is the most protected organ in your body. It runs almost entirely on glucose. It does not store meaningful amounts of glucose on its own. So, your body has built an elaborate backup system to ensure your brain never runs short of fuel, especially overnight when you are asleep and not eating and not providing fuel from outside. That backup system lives in your liver. Think of your liver as a glucose storage warehouse and distribution center. During the day, when you eat and glucose enters the bloodstream, the liver captures a significant portion of that glucose and stores it as a compound called glycogen. Think of glycogen as neatly packaged glucose, ready to be released when needed. Then at night, while you're asleep, the liver begins a slow, controlled release of that stored glucose back into the bloodstream. This keeps your brain fueled through the hours when no food is coming in. This keeps your blood sugar from dropping dangerously low while you sleep. It is a protective, intelligent process that your body has been running since before you were diagnosed with anything. That part is completely normal and healthy. But here is where the system begins to break down in people with insulin resistance. Insulin is the hormone responsible for managing and moderating that overnight glucose release from the liver. Think of insulin as the manager of the warehouse. When glucose is already adequate in the bloodstream, insulin sends a clear signal to the liver. We have enough, slow down, reduce the flow. In a healthy body with normal insulin sensitivity, the liver receives that signal clearly and responds appropriately. The release eases off. Glucose stays in a healthy range through the night. You wake up with stable, reasonable fasting numbers. In a body with insulin resistance, the communication system between insulin and the liver becomes compromised. The liver stops receiving that management signal clearly. It is almost as if the signal is being transmitted, but the receiver is not picking it up properly. So instead of ozzing off when glucose is already adequate, the liver keeps releasing more. The controlled, gentle overnight release becomes prolonged and excessive. And it tends to peak in the early morning hours, precisely the time when you are about to wake up and check your blood sugar. This is called the dawn phenomenon. It is real, it is well documented, and it affects a significant number of people with type 2 diabetes and prediabetes. It is one of the primary reasons why someone can eat carefully, sleep adequately, take their medications faithfully, and still wake up with higher glucose than they went to bed with. But here's the next layer of this, and this is where it gets really important. In many people with insulin resistance, something additional is happening alongside all of this. Fat begins to accumulate in and around the liver itself. This condition is called non alcoholic fatty liver disease, though most people just call it fatty liver. And it is dramatically more common than most people realize. It does not cause pain in the early stages. There are often no obvious symptoms at all. Most people have no idea it is present until it shows up on an imaging test or reveals itself through blood work patterns. When fat builds up inside the liver, it adds a layer of inflammation and metabolic disruption to an organ that is already struggling to regulate glucose properly. The liver's ability to receive and respond to insulin signals becomes even more impaired. The overnight glucose release becomes even harder to control, and the whole cycle of high morning glucose becomes harder to interrupt, even with dietary changes, even with medications. Here's the research finding that I think is genuinely remarkable and that I want every person watching this to hear clearly. Multiple studies from major research institutions have shown that people with fatty liver are significantly more likely to develop worsening blood sugar control over time. That connection is not subtle or theoretical. It is consistent across large, long-term studies. The liver is quietly driving blood sugar outcomes in ways that most diabetes management conversations completely ignore. But here's the hopeful part, and this matters enormously. Research has also shown that when people improve their liver health, their fasting glucose often begins improving before significant weight loss even occurs, before the scale shows dramatic changes, before major shifts in other health markers. The metabolic environment improves first. This is telling us something crucial. The condition of your liver, the level of inflammation and fat accumulation inside that organ may matter more to your morning blood sugar than the specific meal you ate 12 hours ago. And improving that condition is something you have real, meaningful influence over through choices you make every single day. Now, let us go through the key factors that drive this cycle. The things that deepen insulin resistance, increase liver fat, and make the overnight glucose release worse. And for each one, I want to give you something genuinely practical. The first major driver is ultra-processed food. I know most people hear that and immediately think, yes, I know sugar. I avoid sugar. I read labels. But I want to go past that because the sugar conversation, as important as it is, misses a large part of what is actually happening. Ultra processed foods are not just high in sugar. They are complex, engineered combinations of refined carbohydrates, certain types of inflammatory fats, chemical preservatives and additives, excessive sodium, flavor enhancers, and industrially concentrated ingredients that your liver and your whole metabolic system were simply never designed to handle in the quantities that have become normal in modern life. One of the most significant offenders specifically for liver health is industrial fructose. Not the natural fructose found in a whole apple or a handful of blueberries. The body handles that reasonably well because it comes packaged with fiber and water and other nutrients that slow and moderate its absorption. I mean, the concentrated, heavily processed form found in many packaged foods, sweetened beverages, and processed snacks. Your body processes that kind of fructose almost exclusively through the liver. And in large, repeated, chronic doses, it actively promotes fat accumulation inside the liver over time. The mistake that catches so many people is assuming that if a food says low fat on the label, it is automatically a safe choice. Or if something is marketed as diabetic friendly, it must be helping rather than harming. Many of those products are still loaded with refined starches, industrial sweeteners, and ingredients that create exactly the kind of liver burden we are talking about. The label says one thing. The metabolic reality is something quite different. Reducing ultra-processed food is not just about cutting sugar grams. It is about reducing the total burden on your liver. Every meal that comes from whole, recognizable ingredients, things that look roughly like what they were before processing, gives your liver less to fight through, and less burden on the liver means better insulin signaling. Better insulin signaling means more controlled overnight glucose release, and that means better morning numbers over time. The second factor is alcohol, and I want to address this honestly and directly without turning it into a lecture. The relationship between alcohol and blood sugar is more complicated than most people realize. Some drinks cause a relatively quick rise in blood sugar. Others actually cause blood sugar to dip in the short term, which can then trigger a rebound rise later in the night, contributing to unstable overnight glucose. And for people on certain diabetes medications, alcohol combined with those medications can create additional complications. But the larger issue, for the purposes of what we are discussing today, is what chronic alcohol consumption does to the liver over time. Your liver is already under significant metabolic pressure in the context of insulin resistance. It is already working harder than it should to manage glucose regulation. Adding regular alcohol consumption on top of that increases liver inflammation, disrupts the liver's ability to process fats and glucose properly, and compounds the exact problem we are trying to address. Even modest, consistent reductions in alcohol can produce meaningful improvements in fasting glucose for some people. Not because alcohol is purely toxic and must be eliminated forever, but because the liver responds to reduced burden. Give it less to manage, and it begins managing what it has more effectively. The third factor is one that surprises almost every patient I bring it up with, because it is so different from the usual conversation about blood sugar. It is muscle mass. Most people think of muscle in terms of appearance, how they look, whether they seem fit or strong or athletic. But metabolically, muscle is one of the most important glucose management systems in your entire body. And losing muscle mass, particularly in the arms and legs, is one of the most underappreciated drivers of worsening insulin resistance and blood sugar control. Here is why. Healthy, active muscle tissue is extremely efficient at absorbing glucose directly from the bloodstream. Muscle cells pull sugar out of circulation and use it for energy, a process that happens even without a large insulin response. The more metabolically active muscle you have, the less glucose stays circulating in the blood and the less demand there is on the insulin system overall. When muscle mass decreases, that absorption capacity decreases with it. The body loses one of its primary tools for keeping glucose in balance. And insulin, already struggling to get its signals through clearly, has to work even harder for less result. Now think back to that body shape pattern I mentioned earlier. The growing waistline with the thinner arms and legs. This is not a coincidence of aging. This is a specific metabolic pattern that develops in many people with insulin resistance. The body shifts towards storing fat centrally, around and inside the abdomen, around the liver. At the same time, muscle tissue in the limbs gradually decreases, often because of reduced activity, hormonal changes, and metabolic shifts related to insulin resistance itself. The result is a body that has simultaneously gained fat in the worst possible places and lost muscle from the most metabolically useful places. Research is very consistent on this point. Resistance training, the kind of exercise that challenges your muscles and signals them to grow and maintain their mass, measurably improves fasting glucose and insulin sensitivity in people with type 2 diabetes. The improvement is not dramatic in any single session, but over weeks and months of consistent effort, the effect on blood sugar control is real and clinically meaningful. And the critical mistake that holds so many people back is believing that cardiovascular exercise alone is the complete answer. Walking is genuinely valuable, and we are going to talk about a specific way to use it in a moment. But if you are only doing gentle cardio and not also challenging your muscles in some way, you are leaving one of your most powerful metabolic tools completely unused. You do not need a gym. You do not need to lift heavy weights or follow a complicated program. Resistance bands used at home, bodyweight exercises like squats, push-ups modified to whatever level you are capable of, or simple seated exercises if mobility is limited. Carrying groceries, gardening, climbing stairs. The goal is to challenge the muscles enough that they respond, adapt, and maintain their glucose absorbing capacity. Start wherever you are, just start. Now we are moving into the factors that can produce some of the fastest and most noticeable changes in morning glucose, the ones that directly affect what happens in your body during those overnight hours. The fourth factor is evening movement. And this is one of my favorites to talk about because it is so simple and yet so consistently underestimated. After you eat dinner, your blood glucose rises. That is a completely normal physiological process. Your digestive system breaks down the food, glucose enters the bloodstream, and your body works to bring that level back down over the following couple of hours through insulin mediated uptake into cells. The speed and efficiency of that process, how quickly and completely your glucose returns to a stable level before you go to sleep, has a direct impact on what your overnight numbers look like. If your post-dinner glucose is still elevated when you go to bed, there is more glucose in circulation for your liver to compound upon during the night. Here is where a short walk after dinner becomes genuinely powerful. When your muscles are active, even gently active as in a relaxed walking pace, they begin absorbing glucose directly from the bloodstream. This process is partially independent of insulin. Moving muscles pull glucose in, which means less glucose stays elevated in circulation, which means your body reaches a more stable baseline before you sleep, which means the liver has less to work with when it begins its overnight release. 10 to 15 minutes of gentle walking after your evening meal, that is the starting point. Not a workout, not exercise in the traditional sense, just movement. Something accessible to virtually anyone regardless of fitness level or mobility limitations. And the changes people notice from this single habit often arrive surprisingly quickly. Some people see improvements in their morning glucose numbers within the first week. They also report feeling less heavy and bloated after dinner, having more stable energy through the evening, sleeping a little better, and waking up feeling clearer. All of these things are connected and they all flow from the same underlying mechanism. The body is handling glucose more efficiently before sleep begins. The fifth factor is sleep quality. And I want to spend a real amount of time here because this is probably the most consistently underestimated factor in blood sugar management that I encounter in clinical practice. Poor sleep directly and measurably disrupts insulin sensitivity. This is not a soft association. This is a documented, reproducible effect. Even a single night of significantly disrupted or shortened sleep can reduce how well your cells respond to insulin the following day. For someone who already has insulin resistance, that additional disruption is layered on top of an already compromised system. But here's the more specific mechanism for what happens overnight when sleep is poor. During deep sleep, the body does extensive metabolic repair work. Stress hormones settle and quiet down. Inflammatory processes that were activated during the day begin to resolve. The liver operates in a more regulated, lower demand state. The whole system gets the downtime it needs to reset. When sleep is disrupted, fragmented, or too short, stress hormones, particularly cortisol, remain elevated. And cortisol is a direct trigger for the liver to release more glucose. It is one of the body's primary tools for mobilizing energy during times of perceived stress or threat. Elevated cortisol at night tells the liver, we may need more fuel, keep releasing. So if you are sleeping poorly, you are essentially giving your liver a stronger signal to over-release glucose overnight, compounding the dawn phenomenon we discussed earlier, creating a perfect storm for a high morning reading, even if everything else was managed well. Prioritizing consistent, adequate sleep is not a soft lifestyle choice. It is a specific metabolic intervention with direct effects on your morning blood sugar numbers. Consistent sleep and wake times matter more than most people realize. Your body's internal clock, its circadian rhythm, directly influences when and how your liver releases glucose. Regular timing reinforces healthy overnight patterns. Erratic sleep schedules disrupt them. A darker and cooler sleeping environment improves sleep quality meaningfully. Reducing exposure to bright screens in the hour before bed helps your brain prepare for sleep more effectively. These are not trivial suggestions. They have genuine, measurable effects on sleep architecture and on the metabolic processes that happen while you sleep. The sixth factor is chronic stress. And I want to explain the mechanism clearly because I think once people understand exactly how stress raises blood sugar, they take it much more seriously. When you encounter a stressful situation, your body releases stress hormones, primarily adrenaline and cortisol. These hormones have a specific job in the body's emergency response system. They trigger your liver to release stored glucose rapidly into the bloodstream. They temporarily reduce insulin's effectiveness so that glucose stays available in circulation. They increase your heart rate, tense your muscles, and sharpen your focus. This is the fight or flight response. And in the context of a genuine physical emergency, it is a brilliant survival mechanism. The problem is that your body cannot distinguish between a physical emergency and the ongoing chronic stress of modern life. Financial worry, work pressure that never fully resolves, relationship tension, health anxiety, the constant low-grade alert state that many people live in without even recognizing it as stress anymore because it has simply become normal. Every time your stress response is activated, your liver releases glucose. Your insulin system becomes temporarily less effective. And if this is happening repeatedly throughout the day and carrying into the evening and night, you are compounding the liver's tendency to over-release glucose exactly during the hours when you most need it to behave. For someone with existing insulin resistance, the compounding effect is especially significant. The system for bringing elevated glucose back down is already impaired. Stress-triggered releases stay elevated longer. They add on to overnight regulatory problems, and the morning numbers reflect all of it together. Managing stress is not about eliminating difficulty from your life. That is not a realistic goal for most people. It is about giving your nervous system regular, intentional windows of genuine rest. Deep, slow breathing for just a few minutes can measurably shift your body out of the stress response state. Time spent in nature, even briefly. Physical movement, which provides an outlet for the energy that stress hormones mobilize. Connection with people you trust. Time doing something that genuinely absorbs your attention in a positive way. These are not luxuries or nice additions to a healthy lifestyle. They are metabolic tools with direct effects on your blood sugar regulation. Treat them that way. And I want to be honest about something here. Many people I speak with have been managing their stress by numbing it. A drink in the evening to take the edge off, a long scroll through a phone before bed, eating past the point of fullness because food provides a momentary relief from tension. I am not saying these things are moral failures. I am saying that in the context of insulin resistance and fatty liver, these specific coping habits tend to feed the exact biological cycle we are trying to interrupt. Not because you are doing something shameful, but because your body is responding predictably to the chemical signals those behaviors produce. Understanding that is not about guilt. It is about seeing the whole picture clearly so you can make genuinely informed choices about where to start. Now, I want to bring everything together and address the single most important insight of everything we have covered today. The piece that I believe fundamentally changes how people understand their situation. Most people with elevated fasting glucose spend years, sometimes their entire management journey, focused almost exclusively on one thing, avoiding sugar. And this makes sense on the surface. Blood sugar is high, sugar raises blood sugar. Therefore, avoid sugar. The logic feels airtight. But here is what that logic misses. It addresses the input without addressing the underlying system that processes and regulates that input. It is like trying to manage flooding by watching the rain without addressing the fact that the drainage system is blocked. When the liver is inflamed and carrying excess fat, when insulin resistance has progressed to the point where the liver cannot receive regulatory signals clearly, the liver can produce high blood sugar from stored sources internally overnight while you sleep, completely independent of what you ate for dinner. Your body is literally generating blood sugar on its own and releasing it into your circulation without any external trigger. And no amount of avoiding dessert will fully fix a liver that has lost its regulatory capacity. Because the problem is not just what goes into the system, it is the condition of the system itself. This is why people feel so trapped. They are doing the things they were told to do, they are avoiding the foods they were told to avoid, and the numbers are still high. And no one has told them that the next step is not more restriction. The next step is improving the internal environment, specifically improving how the liver functions, how much inflammatory fat it is carrying, how well it can receive and respond to insulin's signals. And here is what I want you to hold on to because this is the genuinely hopeful part. The liver is a remarkably resilient organ. It has a capacity for regeneration and improvement that most people underestimate. When the inputs change, when the burden is reduced and the right supportive conditions are provided, the liver responds. Not overnight. Not in 1 week, but meaningfully over weeks and months of consistent effort. Reducing ultra-processed foods reduces the fructose and industrial ingredients that drive liver fat accumulation. Evening walks help the body clear glucose before sleep, so the liver has less to manage overnight. Resistance training builds muscle tissue that absorbs glucose independently, reducing the overall metabolic load on the liver and the insulin system. Better sleep gives the liver the regulated, low cortisol overnight environment it needs to function properly. Managing stress reduces the chronic cortisol signals that tell the liver to keep releasing glucose unnecessarily. All of these things work together. None of them is a single magic fix. All of them, done with reasonable consistency, begin to change the metabolic environment in ways that show up in your fasting glucose numbers. If everything I have described today feels overwhelming, I need you to hear something very clearly. You do not need to do all of this perfectly, immediately, starting tomorrow morning. I have watched more people fail at sustainable change by trying to overhaul everything at once than by any other single error. The intensity burns out. The all or nothing mindset leads to giving up entirely when one day goes imperfectly. What actually works, what I have seen produce lasting change in real patients with real lives and real challenges, is starting with one honest, sustainable change. Doing it consistently, noticing what happens, adding another change when the first one feels established. Maybe your first step is the evening walk. 10 minutes after dinner tonight, not a workout, just a walk. See what your morning number looks like in a week of doing that consistently. Maybe your first step is removing one ultra-processed snack in the evening and replacing it with something simpler. A small handful of nuts, some sliced vegetables with hummus, a piece of whole fruit. One swap, done consistently, matters. Maybe your first step is committing to a consistent bedtime for the next 2 weeks and observing how your morning readings respond. These are not dramatic interventions. They are small, accessible, repeatable changes that compound into meaningful metabolic shifts over time. And as you make these changes, I want you to pay attention to more than just the glucose number on the meter. Pay attention to how you feel when you wake up. Less thirsty, less heavy, a little clearer in the head, less bloated after dinner, more stable energy in the evening hours. These are signs that the internal environment is beginning to shift. The body shows you these signals before it shows you dramatic numbers on a meter. Learn to notice them. They matter, and they are telling you something real. I often give patients a simple framework for the first month. Reduce ultra-processed food intake. Not eliminate it overnight. Reduce it one swap per day to start, building gradually. Walk for 10 minutes after dinner as often as you can. Not every single night perfectly. but make it the default intention. Get to bed at a consistent time. Your liver and your cortisol levels respond to sleep rhythm regularity. Add some form of muscle challenging activity twice per week. Whatever your current capacity allows, start there and build. At the end of 30 days, look at the overall trend in your morning glucose readings. Look at your energy. Look at how you feel waking up each day. Look at whether your waistline has shifted even slightly. These are your feedback signals. And when the internal environment begins changing, these signals will show it. I want to close with something that I genuinely believe and that I have seen confirmed throughout my career in ways I never tire of witnessing. Your body is not your enemy. I know it can feel that way. When you are doing what you believe is right and the number is still high, when you are trying and the scale and the meter both seem to be ignoring your effort, it is natural to feel like your body has turned against you, like the situation is beyond your influence, like you have somehow passed a point of no return. But that is not what is actually happening. Your body is responding to its environment. It is doing exactly what a metabolic system does when it has received certain inputs, certain stressors, certain deprivations over a sustained period of time. It is not broken in some permanent